The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Hello and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily radio show. Sorry for the delay. Thank you so much for sticking around, for being patient with us. We had been hoping to bring you Mr. Stephen Flurry live from Branson, Missouri, on the road with the Celtic Throne musical and an update on how the performance is going over there. Unfortunately, the network connection just between there and headquarters just wasn't good enough. It just kept stopping and starting every 10, 20 seconds and chopping up and jump. Anyway, it was a bit of a mess. We couldn't get it to work, and so you're stuck with me instead. But we're recording. I think he's still speaking right now. He's recording that segment, and I'm sure we will find a way or make one of getting that out to you. And you'll still be able to hear that from him and continue hearing from him in the days and the weeks ahead. So instead, I thought I'd go over some news. Unfortunately, I can't give you an update on that performance. I'm sure you're all eager to know how that's going, as am I. But we might get into a bit of music and the college's history with music later, if we have time. Well, we've spent a lot of time on this show recently focused on American news and British news, and rightly so. You know, there are some huge events happening in both of these locations. But over the last few days, we've also seen some pretty huge events going on outside these countries and around the world as well. And I want to talk about some of those today. I want to start with some material from China. Just yesterday, China officially passed its new national security law for Hong Kong. So this national security that doesn't sound too bad. It's about keeping the nation safe. Really, this is about the end of Hong Kong as kind of an enclave of freedom over there. Just like some of the worst laws, you have to pass it to find out what is in it. And with this national security law, now that it's finally and officially passed, we can finally get a detailed look at what it says. South China Morning Post writes, Beijing's sweeping new national security law, which Hong Kong adopted on Tuesday, has turned out to be a tougher than expected set of rules that will be overseen and enforced by a new mainland Chinese agency with the power of the state behind it to take over some cases and operate in the city without falling under local jurisdiction. Josh Wong, a activist over there, he's talked about it being the end of Hong Kong and the beginning of a reign of terror. Jimmy Lee, he was the founder of Hong Kong's biggest tabloid newspaper. We didn't quite have time to get a soundbite from him together, but he was on BBC News talking about how, or he was saying, well, I don't really feel bad necessarily for myself. He said, I'm in my 70s, but it's the young people of Hong Kong I feel bad for. Now that this law is passed, they're going to grow up in a society without the rule of law, without free speech. Now, there's protesting going on right now. You have to be pretty brave, I think, to get out there and protest, as they could face being carried off to the mainland and never seen again. But it's just sobering to see a country where people have been used to the same freedoms that you and I have been used to. If you're fortunate enough to live in Britain and America or one of the free countries or prosperous countries around the world, people who've grown up with that kind of freedom, and they're now having that taken away. That's the kind of a world that we're living in now. There used to be this view, this end of history view. The geopolitical thinker Francis Fukuyama was the main person that pushed it forward. But after the Cold War, now we've reached the end of history. That we figured that mankind, we figured this out. If we look at the big question of how does man govern himself, we've got the answer. It is freedom, democracy, and capitalism. Free markets, free people, free speech. And that's the answer. And all of history now is just this one long march towards that destination. And not necessarily a huge amount of people agreed with that, but I think that thinking rubbed off on a lot of us. And this idea that freedom was the default. And I think what we're seeing in Hong Kong is just a sobering wake up that no, it's not. That actually we've had a lot of freedom because there's been a window of time. You could say a window of time because of unusual circumstances. Really, it's a window of time due to God's blessings and God's plan on this earth that has allowed freedom to spring up. But that window is closing. And you're starting to see it in places like Hong Kong. And that's coming soon. I mean, you could say you've seen it to a large degree in South Africa, where it's not necessarily a tyrannical government, or at least not a totalitarian government, but a place where law and order have broken down and the government will turn a blind eye to certain crimes and permit crimes to go on. But we're living in this world where freedom is going backwards. And that's what's happening in Hong Kong is a sobering reminder of that. Another news story, very sobering story, coming out of China. And this is about basically a genocide that's going on right now in China. The Associated Press put together an investigation. I think they published that yesterday or the day before on what's going on with China's Uyghur population. So these are mostly Muslim people that live in the northwest of China. The area that they live in is, I think it's China's biggest province, a very big one anyway, and it's a crucial one for China's Belt and Road Initiative and China extending their power across Central Asia, linking up to Europe. It's a province that they want to control as a buffer as well. But it's full of these Muslims that don't necessarily, that aren't the biggest fans of China's Communist Party and being ruled by China. And so they're killing a lot of them. We've heard before, I'm sure, about the 1 million or so Uyghurs that have been locked in concentration camps and the satellite images of those re-education centers. I've seen videos of people on the ground of what it's like there and the restrictions upon daily life that are put in place. But what this latest report talks about is the forced sterilizations, the abortions that China is carrying out here. They're carting people off to jail for having too many kids. If you have more than 3 children or 3 or more children, you're at great risk over there. They're forcibly sterilizing women. They're forcibly aborting babies. The birth rates in the region, they've dropped by more than 60% since 2015, from 2015 to 2018. Joanne Smith Finley, who was involved in this investigation, she said it's not an immediate, shocking mass killing on the spot type genocide, but it's slow, painful, creeping genocide. So they're not killing people, but they're making sure that there's a lot of children that don't get born. And what do we hear about this? What do we hear about these stories? I mean, what we hear about on our news too often is the quote-unquote genocide against young black men in America, because about 10 unarmed black men are killed each year by police. And you get some commentators talking about that as genocide. Well, this in China is a real genocide happening right now, involving vast numbers of people. But we don't really do anything. Maybe it occasionally makes a few headlines, but even then it doesn't really bump some of those domestic stories out of the news. And I've been talking about the British Empire in the last couple of shows that I've been on the Trumpet Daily Radio. And you see it more and more from these protesters. They deride the Victorians and talk, anybody that lived in that era was evil. I think even if we judge them by our own moral standards, they're more moral than we are. I made the point on one of the previous shows that you have an estimated 45 million people in modern slavery. And we just kind of shrug and move on. Oh, it's not my problem. Whereas the Victorians didn't take that, well, that's not my problem attitude towards slavery. They said, we're going to go out there and stop it. They said, Brazil is the biggest destination for slaves. We're going to send our ships down into Brazilian ports and into Brazilian rivers and islands, and we are going to force them to shut that trade down. And you see it even with this genocide going on in China. In the time of the British Empire, if there was a genocide going on, it at least was something of great concern to the nation. You saw this with what the Ottoman Empire was doing in Armenia. I think the main part of the Armenian genocide didn't get started until later, like 1914, 1915. But towards the end of the 19th century, the Ottoman Turks were killing huge numbers of Armenians. And Britain didn't act sufficiently to stop it. But it was a big deal. The Prime Minister was making some of his biggest speeches about it. And there was pressure for Britain to do something, and there were sanctions and things like that. And I think there's an interesting debate on how effective gesture politics is and whether those sanctions ended up doing anything. But at least there was this domestic outcry of, we need to do something about this and stop this evil. And we're all about gesture politics today and showing that we care. But when it comes to what's going on in China and because it's difficult, we don't tend to care. And of course, then China is deeply embedded in the entertainment systems of this world. You will almost never see a modern movie where China is the bad guy. Because a lot of these companies, Disney, and a lot of these other big entertainment companies, they have deals with deals with the Chinese government. They want to get their films watched in China. There's a big audience out there. They know if the Chinese Communist Party doesn't like it, that they could lose a lot of money. And so there's just even the way that they're portrayed on film is highly crafted. About the only place you'll ever see negative Chinese coverage in TV material is Amazon, because Amazon are banned from China. China's got their own Alibaba and things like that, online retailers. So they have a big effect in stifling a lot of this criticism. So it's like I said, even by our own standards, the Victorians did more about these kind of things than we do. Then another story I just wanted to, or pivoting from Asia, talk about some stories from Europe. If you are from China, if you're from Rwanda, if you are from Serbia, pretty soon you will be able to travel to the European Union. If you are from America, you can't. The EU, they've confirmed that they will not be opening their borders to the US. They've got a list of countries they will be opening their borders to, from Algeria to Uruguay. I think there's a bit over a dozen or so of them. I didn't count exactly. China will be allowed if China opens up their borders to Europeans in return. So there's that conditionality on there. And we brought this up on Trumpet Hour on Friday. I made the point that currently Europeans can't travel to America either. So maybe the EU is just trying to pressure America to open up its borders to Europeans. But now that we've got more details on this travel ban, you can see, no, that's not what they're doing here. Even if America opens up its borders and lets Europeans come in, Europe's still saying, the EU is still saying, no, you can't come visit us. And you're seeing more and more of this blatant anti-Americanism in the European Union. You see this within the American media, just the way that they'll use Corona to make President Trump look bad, and you just see this such obvious manipulation or selective reporting to try and do this. Yes, the people they're finding more people with coronavirus at the moment, but that's because they're looking harder for people with coronavirus. You get this just about perfect correlation of the more tests you do, the more people we find with coronavirus. And so we're doing more tests now. It shouldn't be that surprising that we're finding more people that have it. And then you see all of these reports, and they only focus on red states like Texas and Florida, whereas Democratic states like New York or Chicago's not a state, Illinois, they don't talk about those, even if the numbers are much worse. We were just kind of passing around some headlines on Friday, just even making fun of some of the coverage where the Telegraph's normally good, but sometimes with their American coverage, I think there's a streak of anti-Americanism in Britain and the British press, and then also I think they just kind of get their Washington correspondents get caught up in the whole Washington media bubble. And they had this headline about near apocalyptic scenes in Texas. And you look at the figures, and I think it was like 45 people died. I mean, I don't know what kind of apocalypse these guys what they think of the apocalypse, but 46 people dying is not the apocalypse. So you have just this twisted narrative coming out where it's just trying to be, well, President Trump, he's being reckless, he's causing all of this, and again, they focus on just those Republican states, and you're seeing exactly the same thing in Europe in lockstep with this. And that's all about it. Again, all about America. And it's not just about President Trump for what Europe's doing. They want to kind of send this message, well, President Trump is an incompetent leader. He's incompetent in how he's handled this virus. He's letting people die. But Europe's also trying to spread the message, well, America's not fit to lead the world, to be the world's number one superpower. We need better leadership. We need another power to be in charge. We need other great powers to be running the world, not America. And that's a message you're seeing more and more from Europe. A final article I just wanted to draw your attention to. This is from Conservative Global, not a news source I've really used much before, come across much before. But it's called Merkel, Macron, and Putin Want to Carve Up Europe Once More. But it's another expose of this important trend that you're seeing in Europe turning against the United States. And it's by someone from Lithuania lamenting kind of how his country is being thrown under the bus as Germany and Russia carve up Europe between them. And it talks about how Germany and France are kind of working together, working against America. This article states, after Donald Trump demanded all NATO member states met their agreed-upon obligations and provide 2% of their GDP for their defense efforts, Germany defaulted and exclaimed it could no longer trust its partnership with the US, and from there on out, Europe would take care of its own security. France stood firmly at Germany's side on the matter and took the issue one step further after President Macron initiated serious considerations for establishing the EU's very own military force. And then, and just in case we forget what the EU leaders consider to be their enemies, Macron stressed that the aforementioned EU military force would be tasked with protecting it from threats posed by Russia, China, and the US. Germany's silence on the issue was rather telling. It appeared that the most relevant of the EU capital cities are currently preoccupied with ensuring that the relationship with the US could no longer be considered a partnership. There's no transatlantic partnership anymore. And then this article goes on to focus on this Nord Stream 2 pipeline where Russia and Germany are working closely together to control Europe's energy supplies. The article states the laying of gas pipelines across the bottom of the Baltic Sea brings thoughts of a Merkel-Macron-Putin pact. I thought it was interesting the way he brought France into that, given that Trumpet editor-in-chief Gerald Fleury has talked about the role that France has been playing in supporting Germany and supporting this push away from the United States from Germany. Whatever we call it, an agreement of this sort, not unlike one signed 8 decades ago, so talking about the agreement signed between Hitler and Stalin to divide Europe up, would make Lithuania not only subject to the larger powers, but a mere toy of theirs. And so talking about how Germany, France, Russia are just dividing up Europe between them. Well, it is a bit of a bleak picture of the world, but it's an accurate picture of the world. You've got China rising, you've got Europe and Germany doing deals with each other. You see freedom and democracy under attack within Britain and America, from outside Britain and America, from things being rolled back across Hong Kong. And I mentioned Mr. Fleury is in Missouri with the Celtic Throne musical. And really, I think when you take a sobering look at the world, it really shows the importance that there is in bringing hope to the world by things like this musical. And just in the few minutes left, I'll just maybe turn to one or two scriptures that, and we'll start with one in the book of 1 Samuel, and we'll look at 1 Samuel chapter 10. But you see the importance, or why the world needs a hope that's just very real and vividly presented. Because there isn't any hope just looking at world events by themselves. Looking at what is happening in Hong Kong and then just even the way you see Britain and America domestically not standing up for a lot of these things that they used to believe in. And you see the importance of a vision of hope that the Bible brings. And one of the things that God's church and God's people have always done is use music to bring that vision of hope alive. It is possible you could maybe look at what's happening and say, well, why is there this church, this college so involved in bringing this musical production and putting so much effort and resources into really it's a world-class musical production? If you didn't get a chance to see that, I'd really encourage you to watch that live stream on Sunday, and you can find more details of that from our website, thetrumpet.com. But I was just reading this the other day that I thought is really it's really interesting. Is if we turn to 1 Samuel chapter 10 and verse 5, and it is talking about Saul, but you see Saul. Well, Samuel tells Saul, "You shall meet a company of prophets coming down from the high place with a psaltery and with a tabret and with a pipe and a harp before them, and they shall prophesy." So Samuel, you can see elsewhere you can see in 1 Samuel chapter 7 and verse 16 and 17 that Samuel was traveling around and that Samuel established institutions for training and teaching young people, the schools of the prophets. And here, Saul encounters some of these young people that have been trained by Samuel at his school. And well, what are they doing? They're prophesying with music. They're bringing a prophetic message with music. And this is definitely not the only example of that. You can look at Exodus chapter 15 and verse 20, for example, when Israel crossed the Red Sea, and then they rejoice with music and dancing. And again, there's a beautiful message that is brought in that song and in that music and in that dancing. And then there are several other references in the Bible to a message being brought with music and dancing. And it's inspiring to see, well, look, this is the history of God's college. It goes back thousands of years that you've got this institution that has been bringing a message to the world that's led by God using one man, and that that as part of that, it's been doing that through music and dancing and culture. And you can go through and you see what those different musical instruments are talking about. But they're playing different musical instruments together. They've got an ensemble. They've got an advanced musical culture, an advanced musical society. Judges chapter 3 as well. You can see the prophetess Deborah with bringing a message with music and dancing. And really, that's what Celtic Throne does: is it brings a message with music and dancing, and it has bits in there that portray the dark times that are ahead, the dark times that you can see building already, the dark times you can see building in China, that Hong Kong is probably beginning to experience now. But it just gives you a vivid picture of the hope that is coming beyond that. And that is something that we all need. And hopefully we'll be able to hear more about that and more about that show if we're able to hear back from Mr. Stephen Flurry later. That is about all that we've got time for today. And I said, if you just keep an eye on our YouTube stream at the Trumpet Daily Radio, on our website, thetrumpet.com, and if we are able to post that recording or if we play it tomorrow, I'm sure we will find a way of getting that to you. And if you want to get in touch, if you have any questions, or you can shoot us an email at td@kpcg.fm. Hopefully you can join us on Sunday for that Celtic Throne musical if you haven't seen that already. And otherwise, please do tune in tomorrow here on 101.3 on the FM dial in the Edmond, Oklahoma area.